Istanbul, still called Constantinople in Greek, is a UNESCO World Heritage Site thanks to its rich history and beautiful, ancient architecture. Istanbul, or Constantinople, has passed through numerous civilizations' hands, from Greek settlers to the Roman Empire and the Ottomans. It was the seat of power for the Byzantine Empire, the eastern and later surviving half of the Roman Empire. It featured the world's last surviving great library, and still maintains some of the ancient Theodosian Walls that kept it safe for centuries. A city so rich in history has countless fascinating facts, so read on to enjoy 20 of them. Number 20. A city of many names. Istanbul, the major city in Turkey that sits on the Bosphorus Strait, has gone by many names throughout history. As one of Eurasia's most important and oldest cities, it has gone through many eras and proper names. Originally a small Thracian settlement called Lygos, Istanbul indeed came into its own as a Greek settlement called Byzantium. Eventually the Roman Emperor Constantine named the city after himself, calling it Constantinopolis, which became anglicized as Constantinople. Number 19. It's thousands of years old. If the belief that Istanbul started as a Thracian settlement called Lygos is correct, the city is genuinely ancient. The Thracian settlement would have dated between the 13th and 11th centuries BC. However, even if the Thracian belief is inaccurate, the Greek settlement of Byzantium was founded in 657 BC. No matter who truly founded it first, Istanbul has stood in some form since centuries before the birth of Christ. Number 18. Their stadium was better than your stadium. Constantinople was famed for its hippodrome. While this may sound like a zoo exhibit or exotic disease, it was the Roman name for their chariot racing stadium. Chariot racing was an immensely popular sport that could be best compared to European soccer culture, complete with rivalries and hooligans. The hippodrome reportedly was able to seat at least 80,000 spectators, making it competitive with many modern sports venues. Number 17. Quiet beginnings. Constantinople, when it was called Byzantium and a Greek settlement, was a relatively quiet place despite its outsized fame and later history. Compared to legendary, almost mythical, Greek city-states like Athens and Sparta, Byzantium was incredibly tame and peaceful. It was renowned for its economy and prosperity but was a relatively quiet settlement. In fact, before the rise of Rome, it was little mentioned in Greek histories. Number 16. Constantine was incredibly vain. The man who Christianized the Roman Empire was a somewhat vain fellow. Perhaps he missed that commandment. In addition to naming the city of Byzantium after himself, he also erected a Forum Constantine in the center of the town, which featured the Column of Constantine, a 164-foot-tall spire that featured a statue of himself at the top, fashioned to look like the Roman god Apollo. The messages about idols and graven images also didn't affect Constantine much. Number 15. It wasn't most emperors' new groove. Despite Constantine's enamored relationship with the newly renamed Byzantium, or at least with himself, few Roman emperors actually cared much for Constantinople. It was far from the seat of the original Roman Empire, leaving few emperors interested in making the long voyage east. In fact, between 337 and 379 AD, an emperor resided in the city for less than 12 years total. Maybe the Forum Constantine was just a bit too much for the subsequent emperors. Number 14. Not up to code. When the Romans took over Byzantium and decided to make it a new source of power for their empire, they decided to do some massive renovations. It took the full might of the Roman Empire over 6 years to build on top of the foundations of old Byzantium. To save time and money, the Romans literally dismantled many Byzantium buildings, just to reuse the materials to make new Roman buildings. While 6 years may seem like a long time, one wonders about the safety of an entire city, built out of recycled material in such a relatively short time. Number 13. Sieged and sieged again. Between the death of Constantine in 330 AD and the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Constantinople was sieged at least 17 times. In a genuinely enviable record, the sieges were only successful twice, with the Byzantines being able to reclaim the city after one of the attempts. As the name would imply, the fall of Constantinople in 1453 was ultimately the end of the city as it was known, and the Byzantines never recaptured it. Number 12. Constantine was toppled by wind. Even the greatest or most vain man's legacy must come to an end eventually. For Constantine, that end came at the hands of a particularly strong gust of wind. He reigned over the forum Constantine from atop his tall pillar for over 700 years, until it fell in 1106 AD. Appropriately for the man who Christianized the empire, his statue was replaced with a cross. The cross stood until the sacking of Constantinople a few centuries later. Number 11. A new hope for Rome. In addition to wanting to name a city after himself, Constantine also had some very prudent reasons for being fond of Constantinople. He viewed Rome as too isolated and decadent, a home to elites and politicians, and too far removed from the frontiers of the empire. The city was also notoriously hard to defend. While Constantinople had many geographic advantages against sieges, he viewed Constantinople as a new opportunity for Rome to be closer to its territories, and with a fresh sense of leadership and determination. Number 10. Epic nautical defenses. One of Constantinople's most significant assets was the Golden Horn. During the city's height, the Golden Horn functioned as a deep harbor for the city. While allowing a great deal of trade and commerce, the residents of Constantinople also weaponized the Great Horn by adding giant chains to the harbor that could be raised to trap ships already in the dock while preventing new ones from entering. Number 9. A grand Golden Gate. Constantinople was a rather fanciful city, with a golden gate that could only be used for either the return of triumphant emperors or to honor exceptional guests to the town like popes. For everyone else, simple gates into the city had to suffice. One illustrious guest given use of the Golden Gate was Pope Constantine, named after the Emperor Constantine himself fitting. Number 8. One wall isn't enough. As with most ancient cities, Constantinople was surrounded by walls for defense. Walls were historically necessary to repel both bands of raiders as well as larger, organized military forces. When Emperor Theodosius II took control of the Roman Empire, he decided to make Constantinople even safer by adding a second set of double walls that surrounded the entire city and replaced the previous Constantinian wall. Number 7. Theodosian Walls of Might. The massive set of double walls, built under the reign of Theodosius II, became rightly known as the Theodosian Walls. They were considered a marvel of their age, and still highly respected by historians and archaeologists for being an early engineering and construction marvel. The walls withstood numerous sieges through the centuries, and were only finally bested by the inventions of gunpowder and cannons. Number 6. The city was massive. At its height, Constantinople was indeed a vast city, especially for its era. During the 9th and 10th centuries, it's estimated that Constantinople had as many as 800,000 residents. Given the relatively low world population at the time, and how much less populated cities used to be, Constantinople was truly a pinnacle of civilization and one of, if not the largest cities in the world. To put it in perspective, London, which would go on to be one of medieval Europe's largest cities, had roughly only 40,000 residents at the time. Number 5. Until the plague decimated it. Unfortunately, after speaking of its majestic size as a city, one must also discuss the massive downfall of its population, the plague. After centuries of warfare, the people of Constantinople were weakened and provided easy pickings for the new emergence of the Black Death. By many estimates, the city was reduced from around 800,000 to only 50,000. That scale of loss of life is almost unimaginable today. Number 4. So many nicknames. In addition to bearing several proper names throughout the centuries, Constantinople has also had countless nicknames. One of its many names, Megalopolis, referred to its size as it means great city. Another, Basilissa, gave it the honor of being known as the Queen of Cities. Vikings, who traveled far further than many realize, named it Miklagard for big city. The Arabs referred to it by an Arabic name meaning city of the Romans. Number 3. The base of the Byzantines. After the fall of the western portion of the Roman Empire, the eastern part endured and rebranded itself as the Byzantine Empire, as influenced by the Greeks who remained in the area. Constantinople was the capital of this new empire, and it attempted to recapture much of what was lost of the Western Roman Empire, though they were mostly unsuccessful. Number 2. Couldn't be starved out by the caliphate. In 717 AD, the Muslim Umayyad Caliphate attempted to lay siege to Constantinople. This event was the climax of the epic era Byzantine Wars. However, the caliphate found more than it had bargained, for in the heavily fortified Constantinople, the city used its Greek fire and sea chain to keep the Golden Horn open, ensuring they couldn't be starved into submission. Number 1. But many starved trying. While Constantinople endured the siege with plenty of food, the caliphate's armies were far less fortunate. They held the onslaught until winter, which turned out to be colder and icier than usual, which slowed overland resupply trains. Thousands and thousands of caliphate soldiers ended up starving to death outside the walls of Constantinople.